95th District Delegate Chuck Horst. Chuck, good morning to you.
Good morning, everybody. And on the weather, I think I have to side with the Admiral this morning. It's actually rather warm compared to what it has been recently.
This morning.
What it will be next week. So.
Correct.
Yeah. Starting Sunday, the polar vortex arrives.
Now, hold a second. Someone on a Facebook said, how long would it be before polar vortex be used? And I was not going to use the word this morning, Rob. So you confirm what he said. It's already going to be.
It's on the bingo card.
I refuse to let the audience intimidate me as to what words I will or won't use, Bill. I will not succumb to the pressure of the audience.
See, I have an advantage over you. They can't understand the words I say anyway. I go through several different dialects. None of them make any sense.
Let the record show I did not criticize your dialect.
I know. For the first time.
Chuck, you have a new position.
Yes, I am vice chair of the subcommittee on revenue.
And this is all the restructuring in the House of Delegates as to how the committees work. Does this equate to something else previously, or as the restructuring goes for this committee, how did that work?
Okay, I'd asked to stay on Finance Committee, and the only thing that I actually know at this point would be that since I am on a Revenue Committee is under Finance, so that means I will be on Finance Committee as well. However, have not received committee assignments yet, so I don't know what else perhaps I may be on.
What does the Revenue Committee do, Chuck?
Well, since it's all new, I really don't know as to what it does.
I'm going to guess it has to do with revenue.
Yeah,
I assume that, but where do we go from there?
And polar vortexes. See, I'll use that word more now.
So I would guess that and anything that deals with revenue, increased revenue or decreased revenue, those type of legislation would probably come before the committee.
What committees did you enjoy most previously?
So far, I've starting to enjoy finance since I've been on there for 2 years and understand it more now.
You were on education for a while too.
Yes, I felt lost on education quite often. I did.
Why is that? Excuse me a second. Why would you feel lost on education?
I remember you gave us some good information on interviews.
Well, I just felt there was just so much I didn't know and understand about
fair.
it.
Yeah.
Now, I also sat on Energy Committee last term, and I really enjoyed that committee, and I'm hopeful that I'll be assigned that committee as well.
Yeah, going back to education, as we frequently acknowledge that we have problems in the education system, and you just got through making a point. It's kind of hard to understand all the parts. Are there too many moving parts in education?
I guess there's a lot. You got that 3.5-inch thick book of the rules and the regulations for education. So not understanding all of what's in there is probably a large part of why I didn't feel comfortable with education. But I mean, there's quite a few issues with education right now. There's no question about that. And I think just rehashing old news is losing that amendment there a couple of years ago to where the legislature would have oversight over rulemaking. I think was a big problem that hinders what the legislature can do.
Do you anticipate that amendment coming back, researching?
I would not be surprised to see it because I think it's sorely needed. So that would not surprise me.
This was oversight of the State Board of Education?
Yes.
Amendment 2, yes. Right. And, of course, Governor Justice was against it for reasons I'm not really sure why. And I would hope that Governor Morrissey would be more supportive.
Well, I think Governor Justice, I think he was okay with that education amendment. The amendment he was against was Amendment 2. You just, I think, misspoke on the numbers. Yeah. The education one, I think, was Amendment 4.
You're exactly right. Thanks, Chuck. You're exactly right.
And I don't think he had issue with that, but I think all the campaign against Amendment 2 and it created a lot of distrust and confusion among the people, and I think with confusion they just defaulted to no probably across the board on those amendments, I think.
Facebook and others are getting rid of fact checkers. Chuck has just given us a good argument to keeping fact checkers around.
Especially when Bill's co-hosting, Chuck.
Chuck's exactly right.
Chuck Horst, our guest here, delegate from the 95th. Chuck, we have a governor out of the Eastern Panhandle now, Patrick Morrissey. Jefferson County, I understand that 100-something years ago there was a governor out of Hampshire County, as I understand it. So from a reality standpoint, this is really the first governor from the Eastern Panhandle that will understand growth issues and such. Have you had an opportunity to talk with Patrick personally yet? And if you haven't, what would you like to tell him about the needs of the Eastern Panhandle to make sure he fully understands it as he assumes the governorship?
I suspect he fully understands the issues because of being from the Eastern Panhandle. I can't say I've talked to him recently about anything. At the inaugural ball, I had like a 2 or 3 minute, just hi, how you doing, congratulations kind of moment with him. And I guess that night he was busy going around with everybody, everybody wanting to meet the new governor, and I'm sure I'll get an opportunity to speak to him here in the future. I've been a big supporter of his for quite some time. And in fact, when he was running, I guess, for the Senate seat, I was in different clips of a number of his commercials that he was airing on TV and what have you. Mm-hmm. And that may probably actually here on WRNR.
Yeah. What would be your priority number one for him to get through?
Priority number one. That's tough.
It is.
I mean, we got so many things. I think some sort of locality pay thing I would put as probably number one
for all state employees.
Yes. Yeah. When I talk about locality pay, I'm referring to all state employees because the problems across the board here with state employees.
Can he, Mike and Chuck, can he do that by executive order, or does it have to go through the legislature?
I'm pretty sure it would have to go through the legislature because it's a budget item. So there's going to be a fiscal note attached to it. We would have to approve that spending. So in one way or the other, it would have to come through us. And that would be one of those things that I would believe Chuck, being on the subcommittee of revenue, would go through his committee. Anything like that.
Yeah, I would expect so.
And since that legislation has run before, I mean, there had to be a fiscal note attached to it. I don't know what that number would be. Maybe you do.
No, I do not recall.
And I guess it depends on how you break it down. I think that was one of the big hang-ups with locality pay in the past is how do you do it? You know, who decides who gets more, what areas get more, and why. And I think that's one of the reasons you could never get it passed is there were these convoluted ways of doing it and determining who got more money. It wasn't just about the Eastern Panhandle. It was about the Northern Panhandle. Was it Mon County?
Mon County.
You know, and how far of the Panhandle was it? Just Berkeley, Jefferson, Morgan, or did it go down to the greater Eastern Panhandle? So there are a lot of questions, and because there are a lot of questions, I think that's one of the reasons that it failed, along with the fiscal note.
Yes.
I don't know what the fiscal note would be.
And perhaps the way to deal with that, as far as who and what and where, is and I have never really looked at it, but the federal government has a model that they use.
Yeah.
And perhaps that model would work for us. I'm not sure.
Well, I have legislation that I'm running this year, and that's what it does. I didn't shy away. Everybody says, don't call it locality pay. And I was like, no, people know what it is. I'm calling it locality pay. So there is locality pay legislation coming forth that does just that. It ties what counties get it to the OPM, the federal budget office, and they've already determined it nationwide, which counties get a bump in salary and how much. So the Eastern Panhandle right now, it would be the greater Eastern Panhandle per se, that the federal government gives a locality pay to, is somewhere around a 33% increase. And then the Northern Panhandle gets somewhere around a 21% increase. And those are the only areas in West Virginia currently that are tied to it because that's the only ones that the feds do. I think in talking with some other delegates, some of them are on board if we go with the federal model because they said it's out of the hands of the West Virginians. It takes the political football out of it, if you will. It's determined by the feds. It's determined every year. So if you have a growth county, if Mon County suddenly starts growing the way we are, you could see the same thing.
Mike, is there enough support to make this a reasonable chance of passage?
Well, I think and Delegate Hornby can talk about this as well. I think we were 6 or 8 votes short
Yeah,
last time.
something like that.
There was an appetite for it, but you just had to get those 6 or 8 votes to switch. The problem is we're under a new legislation now, and we've got a 30% turnover. So a lot of those votes are gone, and you don't know how the new people are going to vote. So it would be incumbent upon us to try to educate them and tell them why this is a good idea, even though their areas aren't going to get any benefit from it.
Would locality pay in state employees include elected officials? Would the House of Delegates members and state Senate members also get locality bumps?
I don't think so, because
Yeah,
when they do pay raises and stuff like that, it doesn't affect us at
Right.
all.
yeah, I don't believe it would. I think we're like kind of a separate entity out there.
Yeah, totally separate in the Constitution how we get paid.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we've interviewed, when Dale Lee, I guess he's still president of the WVA
Sure, yeah.
for now, and then Fred Albert, who used to be the president of AFT, and we would interview them about locality pay, they would say the fear was that teachers from other parts of the state would flock to the Eastern Panhandle to make more money. And my response to that logic was, if that was the case, then the reverse must also be true, which is that currently, while everybody makes the same amount of money, the salary goes further in lower cost parts of the state. So therefore, all the teachers from the Eastern Panhandle, by your logic, would leave and go live in a lower cost part of the state because their paychecks would go further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can
That's
look at
clearly not happening.
other parts of the state where teachers are considered in the upper middle class in other parts of the state. They're not struggling at all. I sat right beside Jeff Stevens, Delegate Stevens, from Marshall County, and he's a single guy with his own house, 2 or 3 cars. I mean, he says quite openly, "I'm not struggling at all."
Fairly young too, isn't he?
Yeah, young man. He says, "I am very happy with my pay as a teacher."
Because he lives in a low-cost part of the state.
He does. Well, he lives in Marshall County, so actually that would be considered, and Marshall's in the northern Panhandle, that would be considered one of those areas that could get a bump. And he feels comfortable there. And you look at some of the other parts of the state, Doddridge, and some of these counties, because of severance, are swimming in money right now.
Yeah, but Mike, unfortunately, humankind looks at things in relative terms as opposed to absolute terms. Mm-hmm. If you're in the Mingo County and see somebody in Berkeley County receiving more money than you are, you take exception. Whether you need the money or not, you take exception.
Well, they should move to the Eastern Panhandle then.
Well,
and
they
that's
won't.
part of
They
us.
won't, yeah.
We need to
try to buy a
educate
house.
people from Mingo, Logan, Wyoming County about what's going on in here in the Panhandle. And that's one of the things that I think we've tried to do over the past few years, is educate them about what our issues are here in the Eastern Panhandle, and to reciprocate, to go to their counties and find out what their issues are. And that's the only way you get legislation like this passed, because it doesn't benefit them at all. But you have to be there for them when there's legislation that benefits them.
Yeah. Admittedly, there's a lot of turnover, but do you think you're making progress in working with the legislature in other parts of the state that this eventually may happen?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
You think it's happening?
Yeah. I
Chuck?
mean,
It's kind of hard to measure that because of the turnover, but I would agree. I think overall, more and more people are starting to understand what the problem exists for us, and we're not. West Virginia's unique as far as that goes with the Eastern Panhandle and the Northern Panhandle, and perhaps Cabell County might be starting to get up there a little bit too. I'm not sure. It seems like they have quite a bit of growth going on as well.
And you might agree, Chuck, that a lot of politics, and that's what this is. This is politics. A lot of politics is about relationships, about building relationships with other people, and having empathy for their situation. And knowing sometimes that it may not be good for Berkeley County, but it may be good for Wyoming County. That there's things like that we need to vote for.
Yes, absolutely. And there was I forget what it was. Adam Vance had the other year that was for his area. I don't, perhaps the whole southern part of the state. I forget exactly what it was, but it made sense to me, and I absolutely supported it when it come up for the vote.
Yeah.
Simply, I try to look at everything that comes across in front of us down there. Is it good for West Virginia? Not necessarily
Right.
is it just good for the Eastern Panhandle or my district or Berkeley
Sure.
County, but is it good for West Virginia? And if it's good for West Virginia, then I firmly believe that it is good for Berkeley County
all
as
of us,
well.
yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
You started this off, Chuck, by saying locality pay was the number one thing you'd like to see the governor address. And I want to applaud folks like Mike Hornby and others that have taken such an involvement in the education, trying to understand it. The question is, and I know it's hard to answer this because there's so many different parts to it, but how critical to our success in education are the correct salaries for our teachers? Is that the number one issue, or is there other issues such as overcrowding the schools,
Curriculum,
not showing up,
attendance.
Truancy.
truancy?
Yeah, sure.
I think that probably the biggest, and this is ever since I first ran for office all the way up till now, it's always in the top one or two complaints that I get from teachers when I talk to teachers, and that is the problem with disruptive students.
Okay.
Not being able to deal with them correctly, and when they have the problem with the disruptive student, then it not only affects their education, it affects that whole classroom at that point.
Okay, so what Amy Grady has started doing, and it will take time, by addressing this unruliness in the classroom, may be getting toward the core of the problem. I realize there's several cores and not just one, but be getting toward a significant core. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that is probably the number one problem from what I have been told and learned and experienced since my time in the legislature. Like I say, when I talk to teachers, that is always the number one or number two complaint. And at the Martinsburg Spring Mills game, I was out there and had this young man sitting behind me from Spring Mills. Doing a selfie, and he gives me one of these. So anyway, that started a conversation. He was there with his sister, which goes to Spring Mills, and his father was there as well. And they were very disappointed in their education that they were receiving there. And it really most of it fell back to disruptive students.
I think there's more than just the disruptive students component there as well. I think in talking to some teachers, it's a respect issue, and from the students, they don't feel respected, but they also don't feel respected from the parents of the students as well. There's that issue, and a lot of times when they try to discipline, they don't believe they're getting the respect from their administration either. I'm hoping that with the new superintendent, some of that's going to change. The only time will tell whether or not that will change or not. But it's that respect factor all around, that some of them are getting out of the teaching profession altogether because of that lack of respect. I can't discipline the kids in my classroom without parents coming in and yelling at me because little Johnny never does anything wrong, and then having the administration back the parents because they don't want a big situation either.
Sure.
So I think it has to start from the top. That whole discipline, parents as well have to learn how to discipline.
I had
their
this
kids.
conversation with my sister-in-law who retired in her mid-50s from teaching, and she talked about the changing dynamics in the classroom with discipline issues and how you don't get support from any level. And as a teacher, you're on an island. You get no support from the administration, you don't get support from the parents, and you don't get respect from the kid. So what do? You put in your days till retirement and you get the hell out while you're still safe and alive, right?
Right.
Hey, before we leave here, we've got 2 minutes left. Jimmy Riston is done as the person in charge of the Department of Highways in West Virginia. Good move for the Eastern Panhandle, bad move, or neutral doesn't matter. Mr. Horst?
Probably, I'd lean towards it's probably a good move.
Mr. Height?
Best thing that happened in West Virginia in the past week.
Why is that?
Because he didn't focus on the Eastern Panhandle, where the majority of the growth is, and because he didn't answer to anybody but Jim Justice. one of the most disrespectful secretaries I dealt with in West Virginia. So I'm glad to see him going.
Chuck?
I agree with Mike's sentiments 100% there. And coming from somebody the other night, they talked about the Route 9, what the Route 9 bypass would cost going up through Hedgesville and everything. And the impression I get now, especially knowing what I'm hearing now, is Mr. Riston drastically inflated numbers and just kind of blew it off. Say, oh, find me $3 billion and we'll get you a Route 9. And apparently that's not really what it takes.
I mean, what we heard the other night, it's probably closer to
1.5 or something,
somewhere
maybe?
between 500 million to $1 billion. I think is what they said is what it would cost to put Route 9 all the way to Berkeley Springs bypass. And that's at an 80-20 match. So that means the state of West Virginia has to come up with $200 or $300 million. Well, and I don't want to say $200 or $300 million isn't a lot of dollars. It is, but in the scope of Department of Highways in West Virginia, it's not.
And the reality of being able to get it done, a couple $100 million is not that huge
and
for
that
as
could be
badly
over,
as it's needed.
And that's over a 5 or 10 year period.
Yes.
Chuck, good for the visit. Good to see you, man. Thanks for the
Thank
visit.
you.